My next guest represents the first Western government to dedicate an official department to helping persecuted Christians in the Middle East. He's the Hungarian Ambassador to the United States. We discussed the migration crisis in Europe, what Hungary is doing to help refugees return to their homeland, and the populist movement gaining momentum in his country. Here's my exclusive interview with Ambassador Laszlo Szabo. Ambassador Szabo, thank you for being here. I want to start with this office that your government in Hungary established in 2016 to aid persecuted Christians. First of all, what was the thinking behind setting up and setting aside 3 million euros to do this?
Well, first of all, Hungary is a Christian country, and we are not shy to say that. I believe we have to be proud that we are probably one of the only countries in Europe that can state that. It's in our constitution that we are a Christian country and we want to stay a Christian country. And I think this drove the thought process. Also, we have a grave concern based on the activities of ISIS. It highlighted us the importance that 4 out of 5 persecuted people who are persecuted for their religion are Christians. 4 out of 5. So we shouldn't be shy about this. And we can be politically correct, of course, and talk about persecuted religions, but Christianity is the most endangered religion in the world. And
so what is your government doing? I know your focus is to try to keep the Christian people in their homeland, at least in the region if they have to flee their homes.
Exactly.
How do you do that? Who are you working with to accomplish that?
What we are trying to do is to help directly. We have been quite frustrated about big international organizations who have been doing a wonderful job for decades. But right now, after the situation was created by ISIS in Syria, in Lebanon, in Jordan, Iraq, Christians are not getting the aid they are supposed to be getting, and if you pour money to international aid organizations, you don't necessarily help the Christians. The way international regulations and legislation works, once you leave a refugee camp or an IDP camp, as they call it, the internally displaced people camp, you lose your rights to get food and shelter. And what happens that even in those camps, there's a Muslim majority that continues to harass the Christians.
Right. No, and they abuse them in those camps.
Absolutely. So Christians, refugee Christians, are not getting the help they would need, and the only force that keeps them together is the church. So that's why the Hungarian government decided that first of all we develop a state secretariat that is responsible for persecuted Christians in the Middle East and Africa. And we wanted to make sure that this very limited resource we have, because we are a small country, only the size of Indiana with 10 million people, we want to make sure that the help we provide to the Middle East will reach the Christians in the Middle East. Of course, we are not exclusive, so all the schools, all the hospitals we rebuilt are open to anyone.
Right.
But we are doing this through the church so that the Christians who are there in the region, especially in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, are getting the help.
Give me a sense of the situation in Europe today. Your Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, was just re-elected to a huge landslide election. Give me a sense of his platform. I know he has been very open about vocalizing his concern that the EU has these mandated numbers of refugees that must be accepted by a country, and he feels that that is an endangerment to both the culture and the religious makeup of the country. Why?
Yes, well, first of all, Hungary was the only country in 2015 that kept the rules and the regulations of the European Union. The Schengen zone is on our southern border. We are mandated by the European Union to protect this border from illegal migration. If someone comes through with a passport, with a valid visa, or if someone asks for asylum, there's a process to go through that. But it's a different story if you knock on the door versus you tear down the fence. These are two very different stories. So what we were trying to do is, first of all, to maintain legality in the European Union, to protect the external border from illegal migration, and to make sure that migration that happens, because there are asylum seekers, valid
real
asylum
refugees,
seekers, real refugees, we have to provide shelters for them. But we're hard to see that Europe is trying to address the root cause. And the root cause is the war in Syria, poverty, drought, and many other things that make people suffer in the Middle East and in Africa. So what we believe we should be doing, rather than arguing between each other how to redistribute all those people who are not wanted by Sweden or Germany or by some other Western friends. Instead of that, we should prevent people migrating to Europe, and we should provide help where the problem is being.
On the ground.
On the ground. And quite clearly, our money is worth much more on the ground than in Germany or in Sweden.
What's happening throughout Europe? I mean, we are watching in England, in Sweden, in other places, Germany, as the social service net is strained to the breaking point because of the infusion of people from the outside, in addition to the criminality we're seeing in places like London.
Yes.
I think it's something like 5 to 10 knife attacks a day in the city of London, which is just extraordinary. What are you seeing in your country? What strain does this put on the social service sector as well as your law enforcement officials?
Well, this type of criminal activities or terrorist attacks are providing zero burden on us, quite clearly, because we don't have them. Why we don't have them?
Yeah.
Because we are trying to keep legality. In the meantime, it costed us 0.8% of our GDP to defend our southern border. So raising the fence, which was not supported or has not been supported by the European Union, costed a lot of money, but it was worth it. Quite clearly, we have to stop this open invitation to anyone who would like to live in Europe. If we want to provide asylum, we have to do that for humanitarian reasons, but those has to be valid refugees coming from the war.
Your Prime Minister believes, and I've read a number of interviews with him and a lot of his public statements, if you decode it all, he seems to be very concerned that there is almost a European Union plot to remake the cultural and religious face of Europe. Is that what's happening?
It's happening, yes, absolutely. Just today in the EU, there was a kind of a report about Hungary, how company is not playing along with those pro-migration powers. And quite clearly, this is politically driven, and we believe it's illegal. So we fight. We believe we have a very strong support by the Hungarian people. 70% of all people who are capable of voting went to the polls, and a clear majority is supporting our thoughts. They want to defend Christianity. They want to protect Western civilization. And I think this is a noble cause.
Who do you think is behind this effort to reshape and remake the face of Europe and its cultural and religious heritage? Who's funding this? Who's behind this?
Well, of course, there could be many sources. Many of them are politically driven. Of course, George Soros's name have been raised many times.
The Open Society Foundation.
Open Society Foundation that just received $18.5 billion not too long ago to support their initiatives. And yes, they do some humanitarian activities on the surface, but the majority of their activities are politically and financially driven.
Now, the Hungarian Helsinki Commission is protesting because they say your government is stopping them from resettling people. They do a lot of work, legal work for asylum seekers and refugees. And there's a new tax being placed on any monies that come from the outside, a 25% tax on any money from foreign governments to a group like this. Why tax them at that high level?
Well, first of all, Hungary wants to protect itself, and we believe illegal migration is not good for the country, and it's not helping the safety of Hungary and Europe as well. So we really want to make sure, while the Hungarian government is spending a lot of money to protect Europe's borders, civil societies who are working against that goal are obviously creating damage for the people of the country, for the people of Europe, and for the safety of Europe. You also have seen the dramatic increase of terrorist attacks all across Europe.
All over Europe, yeah.
And practically the majority, more than 90% of them, are either illegal migrants coming through in the last 3-4 years or descendants, first, second, third generation descendants of never integrated Muslim people who just simply hate Christians and they want to change their way of life. And I think it's a threat to Europe, it's a threat to the Western civilization, and that's why we have to make sure that we stay alert. So when it comes to NGOs, we have to be having a clarity of what they are doing with the foreign funding, what they are receiving, and if they are working against the goals of Hungary, protecting the European borders, I believe we have the right to say, okay, guys, this will cost you money.
Your Prime Minister recently met with Pope Francis. Now, Pope Francis has gone on the record as saying, he says it again and again, even in his most recent exhortation, to not accept the migrant as unchristian. What would be your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, I think I don't want to criticize the Pope, obviously. I have a lot of respect to him, but I don't think he has a clear definition of who's a migrant and who's a refugee. Quite clearly, the Geneva Convention states that. If someone is really persecuted for their religion, they are running for their lives, they need humanitarian help. But that help has to be provided at the safest possible place close to their home. So once the war is over, once they can start rebuilding their old cities, villages, they can start doing that.
They can return.
And that's exactly what we are trying to do. That's why we created this Hungary Helps program. We actually rebuilt a whole village near Mosul, called Tulskov. And we actually rebuilt several hundred houses. More than 6,000 people, Christians, returned to their homes after this. And you need only a minuscule amount of money to do that. So if you can help directly rebuilding houses, schools, hospitals, it's very successful. And I'm talking about $2, $3, $4, $5 million. It's not a lot of money, but we can help thousands of Christian families to return to their birthplace.
Well, you're rebuilding civil society, and we're really good at going in and demolishing things, really bad at rebuilding that. And so often, we've seen it in Iraq. I think we're going to see it, sadly, in Syria and in other parts of the Middle East. You go in, you clear ISIS away, and then there's a vacuum.
Exactly.
And you need to have civil society, or ISIS or that mindset will inevitably return in different guises, under different names. So I do see the wisdom of what you're doing.
And we are talking about the cradle, the birthplace of Christianity. And those people lived there for 2,000 years. And what's happening now? So if we don't alert Western civilization, what's happening there, it will be lost forever.
I agree. Ambassador Szabo, thank you so much for your work and for coming, and I hope you'll return to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.